Hello and welcome to Owl Watchers Podcast with myself, DrGrim, and of course my good friend TrickyZerg. This is a brand new podcast, and today we are going to be taking a look at what's going on in one of our favorite weekly activities, of course, that being the Overwatch League. Um, Obviously, we're two avid Overwatch players ourselves. We play the game a lot, we watch the game a lot, and of course, we just want to kind of share our thoughts on what you might be seeing in the coming weeks and take a deep dive into what's going on at that pro level.
So, what's going to happen this episode? We're going to touch on the latest news, maybe some coaching trades, some player trades, or teams getting those. Meta report, we're going to talk about the meta, what's happening, maybe the patch changes, really what's going on, what are our predictions, and then finally we're going to look at players to watch and look out for, as well as matches.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. Um, anyway, we should probably introduce ourselves because this is our first episode. Think sort of like a pilot type run. You know, we're testing the waters, seeing how it feels. We've been kind of talking about doing something like this for a while since we're in our DMs, half the week just talking about what we expect to see on the weekend, and we figured, why not just talk about it out loud, right? See if anyone else feels similarly. But I'm DrGrim. I'm a former Tier 3 main support player who now coaches Overwatch for a variety of teams at a fairly high level, and I watch way too much Overwatch then.
My name is TrickyZerg, or otherwise known as Tricky online. I generally stream Overwatch nowadays, but I used to play pretty competitively. I took a break after December. But I'm also a Tier 3 player as well. We were on the same team, TNS. Anyways, I do spend a lot of time myself watching Overwatch League, as it is a passion and a hobby for me. And I'm excited to get this new podcast going.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But anyway, Tricky, we're talking a little bit about looking at the latest news this week. Do you want to be the one to bring up the exciting transfer news, or the shocking transfer news?
I get
There's a
it.
joke in there somewhere, or should I be the one to talk
Well,
about it?
sadly, our tracer specialist, the best one in the world, the one who scored the best league points on tracer, although that might not be true, that might be lip. Striker has retired from San Francisco Shock. Feels bad, man. What do you got to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really big loss. He's been a player who's been part of the league since the first season, the inaugural season of Overwatch League, and we saw him on that original Boston Uprising roster, playing alongside, Dream Casper, God forbid, but also, Mistakes, he had Gamsoon, Note, Alex. It was a really, really good team, and, under Coach Krusty, they did really well. Even after the whole Dream Casper incident, they made it to the stage three playoffs, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
They played really well in the finals, in a large part due to Striker's performance. Then he gets picked up by the Shock. Of course, he doesn't really see much play time. It's the Goats meta, and we all think, oh, maybe Striker's done, he's washed. But no, by the end of the year, they kill Goats, and we find ourselves in Orisa Sigma meta with Doomfist Reaper, and there he is in the playoffs, playing one of the best Reapers in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Comes in strongest season 3, plays the Tracer when they need him to. In the grand finals, a lot of people talk about how Ans, put up this great performance, Super's Hog, of course. But, you can't forget about Strikers, Hanzo, and Tracer across the series, both like super high caliber heroes that he had in his hero pool. He did everything with a great deal of finesse, great macro play, impeccable micro. I think that Shock is really going to be sad that he's gone. And I think that Tracer Void, even with the roster depth that Shock has in the DPS lineup, I think it's going to be very hard to fill that.
Absolutely. I feel pretty bad. I feel like a lot of people only remember him for his tracer, but we do have to remember that Striker was actually a pretty flexible player and a star player at that, right? Sombra, Reaper, Hanzo, like all these different characters. He even picked up Widow at some point. It wasn't the best.
And he had the Ash
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
the Ash as well. Yeah, flexible player, right? We don't give him credit for it, but like definitely a star player and definitely some figurehead of the team. There's rumors he's going to Valorant, but right for as like from what we know now, he's retired. He might come back. We'll see.
Yeah, well, there's also a possibility that he does his 2 years of military service as well. For those of you who don't follow the Korean scene as closely, it is a requirement there that they have to perform military service at some point. So you see a lot of players retiring to do that, as well as a lot of managers. Of course, back when Runaway was a thing, there's a lot of talk about when Runner left Runaway to go do his military service. And of course, he's done now. He came back. Everyone's happy. But, the likes of Eska as well went and did their military service. So it could be possible that Striker goes to do that during this time as well. But, for you Shock fans out there, don't cry too much, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel, I suppose you could say. Tricky, you wanna talk about that one?
Yeah, true. The light at the end of the tunnel. Well, on a more brighter note, Ans coming out of retirement, the Widowmaker God coming back to the Shock. He was rolling in season 3. Started a little slow, a lot of question marks. He was on like Team Blossom or something in Korea, but like he developed as a really strong player. He also showed a lot of flexibility near the end of the season. We actually saw him playing Sombra too. So that's another point to touch on. Who will fill that tracer gap? It could be him, right? What do you have to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think I'm really curious to see what they'll do, and I want to touch again on that Tricky a little bit later. But I think that we cannot underrate just how good Ons is. I mean, the metric last year of Widowmaker skill was actually how well people did against Ons. For those of you who've been watching any Soul Dynasty games this season, obviously, a big headlining point is profit. But of course, some of the games you go on the Reddit r/competitive Overwatch and they're talking about just how much Fitz shows up in the kill feed a lot, right? And last year, during the grand finals, people were literally praising Fitz because he went competitively up against odds. And I think when you've got a player of that caliber, Fitz, who's like the 6th player, I believe, in the league to reach over 1,000 final blows, and you're praising him not on a metric for how good he is individually, but comparing him just to how good Ons is, I think that really just highlights what a cracked talent that Ons is and what he brings to the table. Now, obviously, it's been a bit, and so, it's hard to say whether he'll start right away this week against Shock's fixtures, and we'll take a look at those later as well. But I'm really, really excited to see him back on the field. The big question mark for me, though, is the fact that he doesn't really play the same role as Striker. Last season in the finals, we saw the two of them playing side by side because of the fact that Striker is your tracer specialist who flexes to the other hit scans, and Ons, of course, is your more dedicated raw hit scan player. He's got, the Ashe, the McCree, the Widowmaker, right? But, it just so happened that in the offseason, Shock picked up another player to play that same role, and his name's Glister. And, I don't entirely understand why Krusty hasn't been starting him this season. In the few times we've seen him play, he looked really good. I think, for instance, the Dorado game against Dallas Fuel, where Shock actually won the series, that was a really dominant performance. And Glister came in and he just clipped heads on Widowmaker. Now, here's the thing. Glister's good. Ons is better. Like, it's not even close. But, I feel a little bit bad for Glister if he's not going to get playtime. But also, I just wonder who's going to be playing the Tracer in this situation, Tricky. What do you think?
But yeah, looking at the Shock roster and the DPS line, we haven't seen a lot of Tayo. That might be a role for him, but even then, I'm not too confident with him and his playtime. Nero has a chance of picking it up. The Glister could pick up the Tracer as well if we're going to be seeing more hit scan and Tracer in the near future. But yeah, it's just not looking comfortable in that position, and I think it could end up being a pretty big weakness heading near the playoffs, as Tracer has shown like a lot of importance being a meta pick.
Agreed. The other thing as well, and we'll get to this more in the meta report, is if we see a meta, similar to last, where heroes like Reaper are in the fold, maybe Sombra, I'm wondering what On's place between the two, because Striker was the dedicated Reaper player for San Francisco in a lot of those cases. And you see Ons play more of those mid to long range hit scans. So I don't even necessarily know if he's going to get starting time in the meta, but we'll touch a bit more on that later. One way or another, though, I am personally just super excited to see him playing again. And actually, what I'm really dreaming of is a great Widow show match between him and Pine at some point this season. Obviously, we've seen Dallas and Shock be super competitive across their series this year. I think that there's a lot of potential for a crazy Widow matchup or a crazy hitscan match with the two play. Obviously, it's been a bit since we've seen Pine, so, whether how he stacks up, how he plays, that's a bit of a question mark. But at least in terms of raw mechanical ability, I think that those two are at the top of my list in terms of just the wow factor and what they can bring to the table on a given day for their respective teams.
Yeah, definitely really excited to see Pine back in the league again. I've been watching his stream. He's looking pretty strong. We'll see if that translates to the Overwatch League level, though.
For sure.
Let's go on to more transfers or losses, I should say, as Spark have dropped GodsB. It doesn't specify on his Liquipedia page whether he's retired or not. We could see him be picked up by another team, maybe go back.
Well, he posted an LFT the other day,
Yeah, he
Tricky.
did.
He did post an
He could
LFT.
go back into tier 2 in contenders, Korea. We'll see, right? Definitely a veteran player and had played for quite a bit. We've seen him at the start of the season playing over Shy. He looked solid. He didn't look exceptional. I wonder what's in the game for him, but let's not talk too much about him. There's also Beast retiring as of recent from the Toronto Defiant. Also a very questionable pickup from them at the start of this season, since they picked up pretty much a full Korean roster plus Logix and Beast. It didn't the puzzle pieces just didn't fit in for me personally. I didn't feel like it was the right play. He played some ball. He was supposed to be some ball specialist for the team because Sato's ball wasn't the best, but it didn't look great. And he played Winston over Sato on certain maps near the start of the season. It just did not look good. He's retiring. Hopefully he finds a home. And other than that, another big change I would say, and definitely keeping a lookout for, is Spilo joining the London Spitfire as assistant coach. Really enjoy his content, but not only that, I think I rate him a lot. I rate him very highly. And as assistant coach, I think he'll slot in really good. He's already coached the London Spitfire before when they were British Hurricane. And I have high expectations for this London team, who are winless as of yet, and really looking forward to their first match this coming Friday.
Well, it's very exciting. It is kind of sad to see those players go, but I think on their respective teams, they are technically outclassed by their bench talent. But I want to touch more on the Spilo pickup for London. I think that, and I watch his stream fairly frequently. I think that his analytical work is really good. And, he talked in the interview, he's going to be working a lot of micro and macro with the players, right? To kind of get them developed and stuff like that. But I think, and something that people might be underrating, his ability to scout other teams and figure out their playstyles could be something that's really beneficial to London as a whole, because he literally has streams dedicated to looking at the way other teams play and running these scouting reports and talking about, what they need to work on. And so if he can kind of bring that kind of analysis and use it to influence maybe what he's telling the London players ahead of a given matchup, I think that could be really, really scary. I think he's one of the best Western coaches out there. It's really exciting to see him get picked up for that reason as well, because we're in a situation right now, of course, where a lot of APAC coaching talent is really taking over the game because, not to say it's undeserved, the Korean teams have traditionally held great success over the NA teams. And, we see these coaches, Rusty at San Fran, Rush at Dallas, coming to these NA teams, and they're doing such amazing things. But that being said, to see some more Western representation in the coaching scene specifically, I'm really happy to see that as well, personally.
All right, well, shall we dive into our meta report and analysis on what we think's going to come in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Talking about the changes, though, right? There's probably a high likelihood that the most recent patch comes in, and that one did introduce a 5% Reaper buff lifesteal. So looking forward to that, I guess. There's another Echo nerf. I believe it was her alt charge 15%, and Moira also got hit by that. We were seeing the Moira players and the Echo players building alt at a similar rate. Definitely shout out to Pelican, who had pretty much had copy every time enemy team had Cole. So that's going to slow down the pace of the game a bit for those rush style comps with the Winston in it. Otherwise, any other significant meta changes as of recent to report on?
Well, not overly, but I really do think that the lack of a hero ban this stage is going to make a big difference, right? Obviously, last stage, we kind of got channeled into that Neo-Goats meta just given who was missing, right? There wasn't Reinhardt, he couldn't play Brawl on the traditional Brawl map, so then you see Orisa comp sometimes, you see this Winston Brawl. No Zen, so yes, obviously, you're going to look at me and say, oh, but Shanghai played ball in the finals, but for the most part, you didn't really see that much in the way of ball comps because, Zen is such an important factor in creating that Discord green light opportunity for the ball to be aggressive. And of course, no Sombra, no Tracer. Again, that really debilitates your ability to run these flanky playstyles as well. And I think those heroes being back in the meta is going to change what we see a lot this stage. Now, personally, my expectations are that within the Western region, we're going to see two specific playstyles evolve. I think that a lot of teams by now are going to start realizing that they cannot compete with the top dogs, the likes of Justice, the likes of Shock, the likes of Dallas on the Winston call. And I think they're going to look to go in other directions instead of trying to force the mirror. And what we might see is some teams leaning into a more Orisa-based team style. I think we sort of saw the early stages of that last tournament during the June joust. I think a great example was when the LA Gladiators were up against the Dallas Fuel in the playoffs. It was third map, Dallas Fuel were up 2-0, it goes to Hollywood, and LA Gladiators pulls out this comp with Orisa, D.Va, Orb, Bap, Brig, a lot of CC. Very difficult to play, any sort of dive into a comp like that when you just have the ability to punish and put out a crap ton of damage at that close range and in those close quarters abilities, especially when high ground's in play. And so what I think we could see is some teams sort of leaning into that style and refining it a bit more. Because obviously, Gladiators didn't win the series, right? On paper, you think, oh god, why is Sparkle playing Doomfist into those heroes? How is this working? But, Dallas is obviously a very good team. They're very refined into their Winston style. And so they can get away with playing a matchup like that. But, at a higher level, one might expect that if one of these teams like LA Gladiators were to refine the Orisa strat a bit more, we could really start to see a bit more playtime on that composition across the board.
Absolutely.
Now that being
definitely looking and reviewing the comp and where the mistakes were held. Honestly, some of the Orisa play, but actually, surprisingly enough, the Torb play, which you'd think would be like the easiest hero in that comp to play against the 6-man rush, right? The players, I'm not impressed by their Torb gameplay, believe it or not. I'd say the best one so far was probably Kevster, who utilized the kit the best. But for example, Kai not rotating his turret, or just spamming right clicks too much. It's a waste of value. The reload time on Torb is too long, and Torb players just not taking the appropriate angles or saving their overload at the right times. It's not looking super strong in that case. But I actually think on the upside, if we do see a more better refinement of that playstyle, it could look really strong, especially with access to Zen. We could see some Zen fit into that comp, or the same comp again, just with 35% lifesteal Reaper.
Of course, yeah. And I mean, we've even seen in the latest contender season a lot in NA, some teams like Odyssey really leaning into the whole Orisa-based playstyle, right? And they get a lot of value. They have a double pocket, the Mercy, put in a lot of poke, they have that high ground position. It's really hard to play into an established Orisa bunker when it's in position like that. But also, I think we have to understand that some of the direct counters to the Orisa playstyle in the last stage got indirect nerfs, right? You're talking about this earlier, Tricky, but the alt eco changes are going to make that first fight scenario a little bit more advantageous for the Orisa-based comps. Part of the reason why Orisa struggled and why, in the APAC region, teams that have been playing Orisa suddenly kind of adapted more to the NA Neo-Goat style was because of the fact that that first ult, that coalescence builds up so quickly. And you have to understand, for those casual listeners out there, ults build ults. When you're playing the comp that you had, the Neo-Goats version, in the last meta, you'd see these team fights, right? Where both teams would dump 6 ults onto the field before the fight, before the point even unlocked, as the point was unlocking to win that first fight. That not only has to do with how quickly they build, but how because of the fact that when you use one ult, that gives you either, a damage boost, a healing boost, or a situation where, more ults are easier to build, Let's say the Reaper ult comes out. Okay, great. Well, if you're living through that, if you're surviving the Reaper ult, well, now you've done a crap ton of healing, so the coal is out. And, if the coal is out, then, your Echo can go really aggressive, build clone, maybe your Winston goes in, builds primal, right? And obviously, it creates this chain reaction where the ults just start to cycle through each other. And that's why it's so difficult oftentimes for the Orisa comp, which is more stagnant in terms of movement and requires a longer team fight, more of a poke phase to build that ult. Bongo isn't exactly cheap, and neither are most of the ults on that team. If you're getting cold through your shield and forced to back up right away, you're just kind of down in the ult cycle, and it's really, really hard to play into just such a strong cycle of abilities. And so I think with that increased coal up time, with the increased Echo clone time, it's going to give the bunker comp just this little bit of extra time before that first coal comes out and pierces the shield to maybe get an ult on the field, build up some counterplay, and potentially deter the initial aggression. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think it could look really strong. It's just up to the teams to play it and play it optimally, right? It's all about the execution at the end of the day. You can have the best counter comp in the world, like the Gladiators versus Dallas match, right, with the Doomfist, and still lose because the synergy and the teamwork and the in and out of the Doomfist comp was just working too well for Dallas, even though Sparkle did get punished.
Agreed. And of course, yeah, Sparkle's one of the best Doomfist players in the world. But I think that ties me to the next point as well. I don't think that the Orisa is going to be hard meta. I think that we're going to see a return to 6-man as well. And for those of you who don't know, 6-man entails the Lucio Mora, the Monkey Diva, and then the DPS, you always have a Sombra, and then you pair it with either a Tracer, a Reaper, or an Echo. And it's a really, really strong comp. Now, it's slightly different from Neo Gods, in the sense that because you're running the Sombra, which was obviously banned last stage, but because you're running the Sombra, you create automatic green lights in the fight. If you silence someone, you hack them, you take away their ability to put out cooldowns on the field, you completely debilitate the enemy's cooldown cycle, right? And we look at the last meta, it was called Neo Goats because of the fact that it was all down to ults. You build up, then you just dump everything onto the field at once. Very tanky, a lot of survivability, right? The EMP, it's a really fast charging ult. It builds super quickly, and on top of that, if you hack someone in the neutral game, you automatically create an opportunity to go really aggressive and secure a kill. So because of that, the team fights don't last quite as long. The initial fight, it's very much like the Neo Goats, where you're creating a lot of poke, you're trading back and forth, you're trying to build up to these ults. The first ult cycle comes quicker, and you can create easier opportunities for aggression off the back of the Sombra half. But anyway, the aggression aside, what this means is, teams like Dallas, teams like Shock, teams like Justice, you have Mag, one of the best Winston players in the world, they're going to have a very easy time transitioning over to this playstyle. And I anticipate us seeing an awful lot of it. It's very clear that they have great coordination at this playstyle. I mean, in Stage 1, Dallas Fuel, even in the meta, where Double Bubble was, arguably the better comp, on maps like Volskaya Attack, they would run 6-man with Sparkle on the Reaper, TP to high ground and just blitz the backline, clear it off the high ground. So we've seen it already this year. We know it's a good playstyle, but I think off the back of, what we've seen recently, various buffs and nerfs, and, the Reaper buff, I think that it's going to be very, very strong. Now, Tricky and I, and I'm sure Tricky will expand on this later, we personally, have our slight disagreements on what the DPS line is going to be. Now, personally, I think that we're going to see a lot of the Reaper character. My favorite character is the Reaper guy. He's very powerful, special move, honestly one of the best in the game.
He has 2 shotguns,
but yeah, he does have 2 revolvers. But real talk, that 5% lifesteal buff is going to be really obnoxious. Maybe you've ever played like a game of Overwatch where you're on Tracer, and the enemy team is Reaper, and you're just poking away. And that Reaper, don't forget, he got that that range increase as well, at the cost of some damage, but that makes one hell of a difference. You're the Tracer, you're poking from this safe distance away, and the Reaper just kind of walks up to you, starts poking at you, and you just can't kill him through the healing because he's just very tanky now, and he has a lot of range. Yeah, no, that's not a very good time for Tracer, especially if that Reaper has any kind of support pocket. So I personally think we're going to see a lot of Reaper Sombra. Very, very good at burning tanks down effectively. And again, we kind of talked about this earlier as well, but ease of use, these players are comfortable on these heroes, right? They don't require necessarily the most micro finesse in the world, but if they're comfortable on the fundamental macro that comes with playing this kind of style, I anticipate seeing Reaper a lot in the meta. I think that Tracer, of course, will be really, really good on, those maps where you don't necessarily need low to high, or they're very wide, so the flanking possibilities are really good. But sacrificing that burst that you get from the Reaper to chase up a hack opportunity, or even a hero like an Echo who has the laser beam and is really good for the ult eco when you put that clone onto the field, I think that, it's not necessarily going to be worth trading out the Tracer for beyond cough maps and again those wider areas. So I think we're going to see a lot of Reaper Sombra personally this meta as well.
Yeah, well, on to my point, right? I said at the start that I was expecting a lot more Tracer because I think Tracer is really strong, and I think a lot of NA teams, specifically NA teams, have great Tracers, great Sombras. There's some of them too, right? I mentioned Doha, definitely one of them. Assassin to a certain extent, right? But yeah, I definitely much more confident with the Tracer pick over the Sombra pick, specifically in the mirror. I think it can work. I like the idea of Sombra and having a win condition with EMP. I feel like the Reaper is a must pick in that comp, and it's probably going to be a stable DPS in it, and to back up your Winston to be able to push. Otherwise, really just the Tracer, the fact you can build Pulse so quickly, I feel like you'll build it before EMP every time. Sombra gets forced out, has to translocate. Tracer can stay in the fight longer, in the mirror specifically, right? Now, when you're playing against other comps, I feel like Sombra is going to be a lot more important. Being able to hack a Sig or a Diva or just any target that will greatly reduce its mobility or its survivability in general is going to be a big win condition of that comp. And we're going to see a lot more flanking Sombra rather than Sombra stuck with the front line, farming EMP, and occasionally pressuring with hack. So that's where I'm taking it personally. But on a quick note, reversing that, right? We looked at the hero bans from last stage, and Ryan was banned, right? And he got a nerf during that patch as well, which was like 100 armor buff, or debuff, I should say. He has 100 less armor. I really don't like it, but I pondered and I thought a bit about it, about these Ryan comps and really what got nerfed, right? Bap got a small, tiny nerf on how fast his exo boots charged. It was 7%, I believe. Lucio didn't get touched. May didn't get touched. Kree got a quality of life debuff with a slower reload speed and a slower combat roll, right? It's gonna affect him a bit, but he's still 220 health, right? Diva didn't get changed. So now I think about it, I think these Ryan comps can be played. I think they're gonna do well into the 6-man. I just think they're gonna be very map specific. We're only really gonna see it on like Lijiang Control Center or maybe even King's Row. Just those really tight maps where the Mei can get a lot of value. And heck, we might not even see Mei against it. It's not always easy to freeze targets. It's just like, I feel like there's some value in that like standard brawl style that could be found. There's also a lot of more openings now that there's no hero bans with a Zen being available. Ball looks a little better. You have Sombra and Tracer to escort him too. So there's a lot of more opportunities that teams can look at and solutions to beat this really dominant comp right now that it's being run by Dallas Fuel.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think the thing about Rush as well is you've got a lot of options. You could play it with like variants like Doomfist and Reaper, both of whom we've seen a lot of play of. But also we can't forget the Symmetra. I mean, Dallas Fuel in the NA region, other than the Shock game, kind of ran over Houston on the back of such a strong Rhine Sig sim comp where they just build up the laser beam, walk into the enemy team, and go burr. And so I don't think that variant's dead at all. But also what I could also see happening is, if teams start trying to play that more Orisa-based playstyle, you see teams bust out, the Sigma, the Rhine, the Sigma just look to run over the bunker, right? But also, going back to what you said earlier with the meta, I cannot undervalue just how important the EMP is in those situations, right? Again, if we're looking at the comparison between what we saw last stage with the hero bans and what we'll see now, just the fact that the EMP can create a really good opportunity just to kill something, go in aggressive, to secure a hack with that, you hack the Diva, your Reaper goes in, you hack their speed, they can't move. I think that we're going to see a lot more explosive and fast-paced team fights as well with Sombra on the field. And I think that's really going to increase the watchability of the league this stage as well, because I know a lot of fans were complaining that, oh my god, the team fights just don't end, nobody dies, hell, that Mora just used 2 coalescences over the course of one fight, what the hell am I watching? But, I think that with the Sombra on the field, I know a lot of people don't necessarily like Sombra, but I really think it's going to increase the pace of play if we see that happen, and I think that could be a lot of fun to watch. So I'm really, really excited for that as well.
All right, well, shall we get into the predictions and players to watch
I think
for this
so.
week?
Yeah, Tricky, what matches are you most excited for this week? You got to tell me.
All right, so matches, definitely the openers in NA, London and Paris, right? Paris coming off of a few wins and generally a strong regular season for their strength of roster. Coming into the season, we didn't expect them to look that good. But they've really shown up, and I'm really hopeful for them. I really like Paris. I like their quality of players. They're, just looking at their players, it's exciting, right? How much value they can get. Some names to mention: Onigod, Khan, definitely Khan, Naga on the Echo. Honestly, all the players are doing their part. They're all looking great. Vestola coming in. Or was Vestola in London? No, he was on Paris, right?
Vestola was on the
Hurricane. Yeah, they managed to
Hurricane.
Get him from Elivote, and Elivote already looked great. Feels bad man. He had a wrist injury. Yeah, and generally, like DrGrim over Neptuno looking really good. Really like his Brig gameplay. And yeah, just a solid roster. They should be, like, statistically, they should be favorites in this matchup versus London. But what's making me think London's going to have like a little breakout stage here is, one, their new assistant coach, Spilo, coming in. And two, the fact that Sparkle is now of age, and I expect him to get pretty much full play time on this. Yeah, Sparker, sorry. Full play time on this roster now. I've been watching his stream. He's looked really good. And it has looked historically really strong. Really young player, really good talent. And I think London are going to take this first match either close or pretty dominantly, like pretty convincingly, a convincing win. I think Paris can maybe snag a map, but I'm very confident with the London roster here coming into the Summer Showdown. And the other game I'm looking forward to is the Gladiators versus Shock. The first time we saw them was in the week 1 of what was it? It wasn't June Joust. It was May Melee, right? They looked. They were on the back foot most of the time. They took a map. Shock also looked a little. They didn't look into form, but they looked better than Glads in that match. Let's hope this match is a close one and it goes the distance. We got Ans being picked up. That's exciting. As for Gladiators, Kevster, no longer on ping. People say ping doesn't make a big difference at this level, and to a certain extent I agree, but I think this could make a difference. You know, having a player there in person could definitely boost the morale of the team, you know. We'll see how that goes. I don't know who's going to win. I think it's going to be very close, and it'll help us predict the next matches coming this week. But yeah, definitely looking forward to that match. And as for the East region, I can't say I'm super excited for any of them because in general APAC has looked pretty underwhelming. I'd say the Dynasty Hunters game could be interesting, and maybe the Spark Dynasty game too. What are your thoughts, Grim?
Seems reasonable. On the theme of APAC, those would definitely be the two I'd pick out as well. Obviously, you know, Seoul's a bit of a question mark every time we watch them. They've got some amazing, shiny talents, right? You know, Prophet, I mean, I don't even have to speak about him. Everyone just knows how incredibly good Prophet is. We've got Fitz on the DPS. I touched on him a bit earlier in the episode, but he's no slouch either. No, we've had these moments where the support line, you know, Creative, Animo, they're staying alive. They're doing their job. They look good. You know, 2U's been a pleasant surprise on the off tank. But then I don't know what goes on with the coaching staff, because then you're watching them, they're playing competitively against Shanghai one day, and then the next day they decide that they're going to start Marvel and Gesture. And that's always a bit of an alarm bell moment kind of going off in my head when I see those two on the field together. You know, double main tank, it's an interesting approach to the game, but honestly their tank line just confuses me in a lot of situations, and I think that lack of consistency is it can really bite them. It can really come back to haunt them. You know, Gesture especially is one of those players. You know, we always talk about playoff Prophet and playoff Gesture. You know, the thing is, Prophet's always good throughout the season, but Gesture's a little bit hit and miss sometimes. You know, we saw him pick the Hog the other day, and kind of just int really hard into the enemy team. And personally, I really wasn't sure what the game plan was there or what he had in mind. But he didn't even build an ult like within 4 minutes. It was some ridiculous benchmark. So he's not even healing himself. He's just not doing anything on the field and just kind of wandering around.
That's tough.
So it just makes it really hard to predict Seoul Dynasty. And, you know, Chengdu, they've got a very explosive playstyle, right? You know, great main tank, Gaga. The supports, you know, Monk's been a pleasant surprise. Really hard to say how they're going to do. Nisha on the Mercy as well. Leave on, you know, possibly the Echo. I'd argue he's one of the best in the world at that hero. It's going to be a good game one way or another. Some great DPS trades. I think the DPS are really kind of the highlight of APAC. Same thing with the Hangzhou versus Seoul Dynasty game the following day. What I'm really looking forward to seeing is, of course, that DPS matchup. Because recently, under the new coaching, Hangzhou has been playing Shy on the DPS. And for those of you who don't know, you know, weren't following Shy, he took some time off of contenders to actually just practice scrimming with Overwatch League teams before he was of age, and I think it really paid off. Because that guy is an absolute nut. He just clicks heads all day long. He's very scary. And, we've got Architect, who's been this consistent performer, originally on Shock, but, definitely has never been a slouch, even through Hangzhou's worst performances. He always looks good. And so seeing, Architect versus Prophet, and, Shine versus Fitz, again, I think that can be a lot of fun to watch as well. Especially, seeing that Hangzhou, kind of a streaky team as well. They had that great, very dominant stage. And then they completely bottled it, lost to New York, and missed the playoffs right after everyone figured that they would be a shoo-in for sure, right after they played so well across the course of the stage.
That was a tragedy.
And so, yeah, just see how they stand up against each other, it's going to be really interesting. If I'm a betting man, then my safest bet would just be not to predict APAC at all, because whatever I predict always ends up being wrong. You think something's going to happen, and then somehow Valiant knocks Philly out of the playoffs, or New York decides to beat Philadelphia. Who even knows at this point anymore? What's going to happen there? You just kind of got to watch, enjoy it for what it is, pop a bowl of popcorn, and just admire some really entertaining gameplay. If we're talking NA, though, obviously those matchups are going to be really exciting. But personally, if I were to pick different ones, I'm actually really curious to see the Paris versus LA Gladiators game on the Sunday. And the reason I say that is because I don't know how Paris is going to look outside of the hero ban. We saw them. They looked very resurgent. I think Get Amazed, the coach, he did a really good job getting them ready. Vestola, obviously great contenders talent, but doesn't necessarily translate to Overwatch League guaranteed performance, but he looked really solid. They walked out and beat Boston. And, he'd barely had any scrim time as well with the team. So I think I'd imagine, with the coaching, they've clearly gotten a lot better. So they've probably been very productive with this few-week break. So I'm really curious to see how they do up against the likes of Gladiators as well, because I think they could be a real dark horse team for the stage. But also, Boston versus Mayhem should be fairly entertaining. I have a lot of faith in Coach Laurie's ability to do a good job. I think that Valentine, I'm 37, Gabe will see, all their players. Stand one, they've just been getting better and better throughout the stage. And yeah, they're not taking out these big top teams, quite yet. But again, I think they're one of those teams that, with the right coaching, we could see surprisingly good performances from them throughout the course of the stage. So, aside from the big ticket headers that we're seeing on opening day, I would personally recommend keeping your eyes open on those matchups, because I think they're going to give us a real good indicator of the strength of those teams going into this June Joust turn, or not this Summer Showdown tournament.
For sure. Yeah, definitely excited to see how a lot of these teams show up, even if the matches might not be close. Just seeing their take on the meta will really be insightful for the coming weeks and the coming matches. So leading into that, shall we talk about players to look out for?
Oh, absolutely. Who are you excited to see play?
Definitely. I mentioned him before, but the mad lad himself, Sparker, knowledgeable, like I said, very flexible, plays every hit scan and every projectile under the moon. I think he's going to do great things for this team. Is definitely going to revive a team. If a great comparison, even though not from the same region, was Punk from last season. Boston, they were in a slump last season, probably the worst season they've ever had to date. Punk comes in, they beat Gladiators, and then their next few matches look really competitive. So just having not necessarily a new player, since Sparker's played with them before, but having a strong player come in again and really revitalize this team. Now the other player to look out for, and it's more of a question mark than a surprise or anything, but is this Taro Cookie guy coming into Chengdu Hunters. Apparently he's been playing for their sister team. But lots of question marks. His hero pool, from what the Liquipedia page says, is very hit scan based with Tracer. So it looks like Widow, Tracer, Ashe, and Kree. Seems like every Chinese DPS player has a sick Kree nowadays. Mentioning Jimmy, though, it's strange that they pick somebody so hit scan based up like this when they have Jimmy on the roster. So it definitely raises a lot of questions as to how much playtime Jimmy's going to get. And I've really, really liked Jimmy so far. I don't think he's put up the most consistent performances, but when he's on, he's on. And there's this whole story behind him being mentored and even coached by Eggsy, who he looked up to a lot. And I think he's really proving himself. I think he needs more playtime, though, alongside Leave. So I'm excited to see If I'm excited to see more Sparker, definitely. And Terra Cookie is a question mark. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm really interested to see if and how those players fit into their respective rosters over the course of this summer showdown. But personally, my players to watch this week, barring, the main points of discussion, I'm really curious to see how Shy does in the APAC region. Again, I talked a little bit about him earlier, but because he was benched early on in the season for Hangzhou, we haven't really, as spectators, gotten a fair chance to see how he performs outside of a hero ban meta. Obviously, Hangzhou had their dedicated style. He fit into it really well. But, depending what the APAC meta is, I'm really curious to see how he'll fit into, maybe a more six-man oriented style or whether they're going to be keeping him on the flick scans and stuff like that. And so he's just such an explosive talent as well. And given the matchups that Hangzhou has this week, barring the Valiant matchup because nobody cares about the Valiant. Sorry, Valiant fans. Getting to Seoul Dynasty, I'm really curious to see, if he can keep it up and put up those big performances. Because honestly, if Hangzhou continues to do well, I would have Shai as a potential Rookie of the Year candidate, which is how good he's looked over the past stage. But in the NA region, I'm really curious to see how Muse does. Obviously, during the main melee, he kind of he looked a little bit rough around the edges, as did the rest of the gladiators. And of course, you main tank players out there are gonna say, "Oh, that's not really fair." His team was kind of not playing too well around him. Of course, it's going to look like he's getting the shit beaten out of him when he's playing Ryan into a Maycree. And I definitely agree with you. I don't think a lot of that was his fault, and I think he got punished by the Gladiators' inability to play Brawl effectively. But that being said, there was a lot of micro mistakes coming in from as well. He got corner shattered a lot. He was pushing out of sync with space a lot, so there's definitely something wrong with the comms there, I would imagine. Um, it just looked really rough on the Reinhardt. And so, in the case that NA is playing the Reinhardt, I'm curious to see whether he stepped it up, but also, just whether he can help the Gladiators continue their trend of upward improvement. They did look better and better. They only really lost to a Dallas team who's kind of cracked out of their minds in the present time. And they still took a map off, right? And his Orissa's also looked really good. So I'm really curious to see whether or not, he can continue leading the way as one of these exciting, rookie prospects coming into the league this year. For the Gladiators, he can keep pulling his weight for the team. I definitely see a world where he can do that, everyone before the season was talking about, Muse and Meg, the two big main tank pickups of the offseason. Everyone wants them. They're the exciting rookies. Meg, so far, other than the 2 weeks last stage where Justice really wasn't living up to the hype, has been a consistent performer. And I'm really curious to see if Muse can reach those sort of levels that people have expected for him as well. And if he can, I think that Gladiators could be a very, very scary team under such a good main tank player.
And to add to that about Shy and Muse, Shy, surprisingly enough, he was picking up the Echo over Architect, having Architect play like Reaper and filling in the gaps on other heroes. So definitely like proving to everybody that he can play not only hit scan at a terrific level, but also like projectile. Like that's nuts for like a pure hit scan player to be that good at Echo. Like just gross. And for Muse, I've been following his journey along too. Definitely was the second most exciting prospect coming out of Korea at the beginning of the season for main tank players. Cracked out Winston and stuff, right? But looking at his gameplay, definitely in the May Melee, his Winston and his Reinhardt play didn't impress me. His mechanics on Winston were fine. It wasn't the problem. It was his timing and his teamwork, his synergy with his team did not look great. But as the season progressed, we saw him on different heroes. We saw him on Ball. We saw him on Orisa. I think that's where he looks a lot more comfortable, which is funny because he doesn't have a history of playing much Orisa. But I guess that's just him playing it in comp all the time. Who knows, right? I think he's very comparable in some ways to Shredlock, who myself I've rated him pretty decently at Orisa and Ball. But it seems like Muse is just like the better Korean version of Shredlock at the moment. We'll see if he proves us otherwise with his Winston gameplay, which has left to be desired. And yeah, that's pretty much the recap on those players. We have anything to add before the end of the show?
Not really. Obviously, to those listening in, it's our first episode, so I want to say thanks for tuning in. If, people find this enjoyable or enjoy listening, we'll probably take a stab at this again in the future. And, if we have any feedback or anything that you want to hear us talk about or get our insights in, we'd sure be happy to hear it. So definitely leave us feedback if you're interested in seeing more of this. And we'll continue to try and improve the podcast as we go along.
All right. Well, our hosts, DrGrim, TrickyZerg, signing off, and looking forward for more content next week.
Yes, sir. All right. Hope that you guys enjoy the games this weekend. If you're looking to watch it with people, just hit me and Tricky up. We'll be in the Discord watching all the games and laughing and getting hyped as one does for all the gaffes and goofs on stage. But anyway, thanks for your time today. Wishing you a wonderful start to your weekend, and yeah, take it easy.